Okay, I wanted to do a quick introduction before uploading this video. Now this I'd been putting off for a while, but today something happened that had to do actually with the Muslim and the Christian communities in the subcontinent. That just made me feel like I really need to upload it, and it needs to be used in communities in whatever way possible. Now let me first tell you why I wanted to do the introduction in the first place. Was just to let you know that this was recorded at Mehergarh. It was a residential training, very intensive at Mehergarh, and I was doing a few days out of that, and uh, the training was on countering extremism. Now a day before I was doing my session, we had participants from all over Pakistan, and we had a few Hindus coming from Sindh, and this one participant coming from the lower community in Sindh, lower caste in Sindh, said that we need help because we have a lot of opportunities to grow, and the communities have a lot of opportunities to grow, and there are outside obstacles which we are constantly struggling with, but then there are obstacles that come from within. This internalized sense that it is our place. In the lower communities, they are a community of mostly sweepers and cleaners, and there is this internalized thing that it is our place, it is our dharma, it is our sacred duty to continue doing what we have been doing, because this is our place in the world, and this duty we must keep performing like the forefathers before us, and our children will do the same thing. And he said it's like a metal cap on the mind. It limits their ability to visualize their own future and aspirations, a limitation on how far you think. So he said we need help, and I said yes, we need to talk about that, but let's talk about the roots of this problem, which have to do with the whole caste system of this creation of different levels, and when it happened, and who did it, and why they did it, at what time, in what ways, and why it is so deep rooted. Before we need to lay bare the roots, and then we need to pull out these roots and go beyond it. So that's what the original video was about. Now, one knows that a lot of Muslim friends of mine would say, well, yes, but luckily we don't have this problem in Islam, because we don't have this hierarchy of castes. All people are born equal, which sounds very wonderful. But today what I heard this morning was from my sister, Malia Hussain, who was attending some interfaith meeting, and there was this discussion about a Muslim doctor who was fasting on that day and refused to touch a patient who came from the cleaning caste, came from the Christian community, and he said, I'm not going to. Oh, okay, somebody came to sit at my bench, so I'll start walking. Okay, so so this doctor said that I would refuse to work on this patient who was a Christian patient who needed help and who eventually died, and the doctor would not operate because he was fasting, and he somehow felt that the guy was unclean, and by touching him, operating on him, it would break his fast. Now this concept of pure and impure, my own grandmother, this is a very common attitude. My own grandmother would tell her daughter, my mother, that why do you have these Christians, these are South Asian Christians, why do you have these Christians working in your kitchen? I mean, cleaning is one thing, but they touch your plates, your silverware, they even prepare your food. Why do you do that? It's amazing. I mean, we are a nation that was colonized by the Christians for decades, for 90 years almost. We still to this day, we look at the Christian countries to give us loans, to give us donations, so that we can run our country. We are so happy running around, jumping about, when a trip to the US goes well and our Prime Minister says it's almost like winning a World Cup because the American president says a few good things about him. And to the Christian community living inside the country, this is how we feel. Where do these attitudes come from? How deep-rooted are they? My grandmother must have converted who knows how many generations ago from Hinduism. Most of us converted from Hinduism. The Christian community and most of the ones who are into cleaning and all, they come from the lower castes in Hinduism, and therefore they are darker, they have darker skins. And the connection between skin color and caste you will know very well, because we talk about it in detail in the video that follows. Those Christians converted a long time ago from the lower castes of Hinduism. Why do we still consider them as unclean and untouchables? They moved from Hinduism to Christianity many generations ago. We moved from Hinduism to Islam many years ago, many centuries ago. Why do we still carry these roots are so deep? And therefore laying bare and pulling out these roots is very important. Now, that's a question to think about. If you still feel that, well, in Islam we don't have this problem, the question is, hundreds of years before these communities converted to Christianity, Islam was here in the subcontinent. Why would the lower castes in Hinduism, in the Hindus, not convert to Islam? In Islam, all people were born equal, right? So it was such an easy option. Why did they wait for centuries before converting to Christianity? One would think they would have immediately switched over from Hinduism to Islam all those centuries ago. Why would they not do that? What is it about the Muslim history that we are not facing, and the attitudes that we still carry? In Sindh, you would still find hotels. I mean, the attitudes towards Christians who converted a long time ago is one thing, but the Hindus in general, where we would, there are hotels that would still have separate plates for Hindus to eat in than the Muslims. These are all attitudes that we are still living with. So more about that in another video. But this video about the castes is not just about the Hindus. It is about the Christians and the Muslims also who live in the subcontinent. So watch the video. Welcome to Ruminations, and we'll have more of these reflective videos about religion and spirituality in future. So do give us your comments.
Subcontinent जब हम देखते हैं दो तरह
So in the
का
subcontinent, there have been two kinds of oppression. One, the religious oppression of the locals. Tribes coming in from Central Asia 3,500 years ago, and a very deep level of spiritual oppression took place here of the local population. And then the second oppression, which was the military coming in from the south and then from the north, when the Muslims started coming in, and that is the military and the political oppression. And that happened in the first century of Islam, more in the 700s. So that we'll talk about later on. First, we are going to talk about the religious and the spiritual oppression, which was the earlier wave, which had to do with Hinduism. What does Hinduism mean? Do you know where the word Hinduism actually comes from? Sindhu, right. Sindhu in Old Persian. So in this area there were many religions. So from the west, when the Persians started coming in, the big river here was River Sindhu, right? And this was the land of River Sindhu, the land of River Sindhu. So when the Persians come in from the west, coming east, they call this area the land of River Sindhu, Sindhu area. Now in Old Persian, S, when it's followed by an E sound, S becomes a H. So Sir becomes H and Sindhu becomes Hindu. And Sindhu Desh becomes Hindu area. So the land of River Sindh becomes the land of River Hind. It became the Hindu area. And the people of this land, who were then the Sindhus, became the Hindus. as the Persians called them. So Hindu really becomes more of a geographical term. It had to do with geography. In the beginning, it had nothing to do with religion. So the people of this land became Hindu, and the customs and traditions became Hindu customs and traditions of the Hindu land, and their religions then became the Hindu religions. So for the outsiders coming in, there were hundreds of, much more than 100, many different kinds of religions here. So when they came in, they said the religions of this land are the Hindu religions, meaning religions of the Hindu people. So we use the name Hindu, Hindu land, Hindu people, Hindu religions, and Hindu customs.
हिंदू लोगों के मज़ाहिब जो दरियाए हिंद, तो उर्दू में नाम हिंदुस्तान, हिंदू, हिंदू लोग, हिंदू मज़ाहिब, हिंदू अतवार, वो इंडिया इंग्लिश.
And similarly in English, we have river Indus, and the land of the Indus was India, right? And then the people of that area become Indians. So it's very similar in English also. So it was always related to the river Indus, and then going east from, because the people were coming in from the west, and it goes all the way to the east, but it starts with Indus, Sindhu, and then this whole area became the Sindhu or the Hindu area. So the Hindu area, and then the Hindu religions were actually many religions of this area. And for the outsiders, they lumped them together as religions of this area and named them Hindu religions. But the question is, how did that take root? This was named just by the Persians. The question is, why would the locals start using that term? The locals should say, we follow Shiva, we follow Kali. So how can you lump us all together under the same term? So why? Because there was a local tradition here which really wanted to bring everyone under one umbrella, under which all the people would live happily together and serve us, right? So bringing this whole area under one system. And we need to talk about this in some detail. So there was a group here that really wanted to bring all the religions under its umbrella. So when somebody comes from the outside and gives one name to all the religions in the area, they were very happy with that, because there was no concept of Hindu before that, of the Hindu religion. So the Persians gave it the name, and this group, the Brahmins, they welcomed that, because that is exactly what they wanted, but they didn't have one name. And now if there was a possibility of one name, giving one name to all the religions of the area, that's exactly what they wanted. To pull all the religions together, and then they would get to tell within that larger religion who has what place in the society. Because this whole place would be under one religion, their religion. So the reason why the term took root here is because the Brahmins here wanted to assimilate everyone, all the religions, under their one umbrella. So the Brahmins were the Arya, right? The Aryans. So the Aryans came. Anyone has an idea of when they came? Around, yes. So 3,500 years ago, this was the Brahmin migration. These were the nomadic tribes coming in from Central Asia. Right? And how do we know from Central Asia? It's a simple thing. Just look at the color. They were fairer in color. The skin color was relatively fairer. Right? We know how it works, right? The skin color, the darker and the lighter. In the world, like in the north, in Sweden, in Iceland, the Scandinavians, they are really lighter. Then you start coming down into Europe, you have slightly darker around Italy, Malta. Then you get into Africa, the ones in the north, Libya, Egypt. So the northern Africa, slightly lighter. Sudan, it's lighter. Then you start going into southern Sudan and it becomes darker. And then you keep going down and it becomes darker. Similarly in this area, in Tibet, Nepal, the skin colors are slightly lighter. So the colder areas in the north, the skin color stays light. And as you come south, the more generations that spend time in the heat, the skin color goes darker. So in India, you would have in the north India slightly darker, then in the south India even darker, and then Sri Lanka and Maldives. So it's a very simple thing. You stay in the sun and the skin pigment starts going darker and darker. And this has absolutely nothing to do with anything else. I'm getting into the detail of this because this becomes very relevant later on. So coming back to the Brahmins, it becomes very clear that they were coming in from the cooler areas and their skin color was relatively lighter, because compared to those that have been here for 5,000, or how old is our history? 9,000 or so, right? The French and the Germans, they said they did a lot of research and carbon dating and all. For Mehergad, they say 9,000 or 11,000 years. So even if we take 9,000, it's still a very old civilization. The Brahmins come in around 3,500 years ago. Now, a few hundred years before that, we have the Kshatriyas who were already here. Those were the first Aryans who had already come here. The earlier tribes coming in from Central Asia. And they had been the warrior tribes. And when they had come here, they had already established their rule in this area. So when the Brahmins came in, this land was already ruled by the Kshatriyas or by the Khatris. And they were both Aryans. So when the Brahmins came in, they could either have been fighting with each other, but the Brahmins in this were very intelligent. We would have to call it intelligent, right? They thought that if we come in and we start fighting the earlier Aryans, we will fight each other out and die in the process. And that would be better for the locals, no? So it said, okay, so what we'll do is we'll take the land together. You continue to rule the land because you've already established the rule in the land. Because they already had the power, so why fight with them? Because both sides would have lost some. So they said, you go ahead and govern the place, you've already established it. We, on the other hand, the Brahmins, will give you legitimacy, basically establishing that it is your right to rule. So we will provide the justification for you to rule. But the spiritual, religious tradition and interpretation we will do. You go ahead and rule. And so we do this together because it is the duty of the Khatri to protect the Brahman, the Dharam, the sacred duty, to protect and to serve. And the Brahmins then would not challenge the Khatris, and the local populations are going to serve us both. And the ones that came in the end, the Brahmins, were the fairest in the skin color, and so they became the highest caste. In the beginning, when we start having mentions of the caste in the text, it talks about God dividing humanity based on their inner character and attributes, dividing humanity into 4 castes. And the highest in that, of course, ends up being the Brahmins. Because the Brahmins said that the highest should be the ones who are the purest and the cleanest, and they are the Brahmins, and they are like a reflection of God himself. Brahma is a Vedic god, right? So the Brahmins were the purest, and after them, the Aryans who had already been living here, they have the right to rule all others, because they too are quite pure on the inside, not as much as the Brahmins, but very pure still. So they are really, really good, and they therefore should have the right to rule, because God has given them this ability and they are born with it. So they have that right. And the locals, you keep doing what you've been doing before. Those who've been working in the fields, this was an agricultural society, so you continue working in the fields. The shopkeepers continue with their commerce, and those who are cleaning, you just continue cleaning, because we are not going to be cleaning ourselves, right? We are the Brahmins, we are so pure. So these dirty works of cleaning, you do it because basically God has put that ability in you to do this so well. And this is all coming from within you. The way you do it, it's put inside of you. You do it so well. So they said you have this God-given attribute to work on this level, and others will do field work, and then the shopkeepers, and then those who are born to rule, and then higher than that, those who are so pure that they don't work. They write the Vedas, they memorize the Vedas all day long. Hundreds of people sitting together and memorizing the Vedas. The 4 Veds that were written down and memorized by these people. Today we talk about castes, but the actual mention was not of castes. The word used was Varna system, right? Varna in Sanskrit, in Hindi it becomes Varna. That does not actually mean caste. We kind of cover it up as caste so it doesn't sound so bad. Varna basically in Sanskrit means color. So God did not divide people into 4 castes. God divided them into 4 colors based on their inner attributes. So today when we talk about racism being really bad and all, the oldest racist system in the world strictly on the basis of color, on skin color, dividing humanity into different classes and defining their inner character and their attributes based on color. That was the system of dharma, of the caste. So tell me then, there are these people coming in from the outside, right? First they come and start ruling over us, and then these new ones coming in who start telling you that it is your place to continue cleaning and all. So maybe my child wants to have a small farm, but now they are told no, your work is to continue cleaning. So wouldn't people say, who are you to come from the outside and tell me what I can and cannot do? Why would people accept this? It just doesn't make sense, right? So I've been living here for 7,000, 6,000 years, and you come from the outside and you are now telling us you do this, you continue, keep doing this, and we get to do this. So one would say, you go to hell, I have my own tradition, I have my own religion, I have my own temple, I follow that. Who are you to come and tell me? It just doesn't make sense, right? So we need to understand, how was it done? How could it be so widespread that it's, to this day, it is still in our roots? How did this happen? So we do need to understand this. So we'll talk about this. In the beginning, let me just indicate that for someone to say, why was I born a Shudra and untouchable? What's the main justification for that? Because I must have? Yes, because in the last incarnation, I must have done something bad. So that in this incarnation, because I had been so bad in my last lifetime, so in this lifetime, I just become a Shudra. So I'm in the lower caste because because I was not accepting it in the beginning. Because I would say, what the hell, why are you telling me this? You come from outside, we have been living here for thousands of years. So for this justification, you basically need the concept of Punarjanam, of reincarnation, so that whatever happens to you in this lifetime is a result of what has happened to you or what you did in your last lifetimes. So initially there was no mention of Punarjanama, of reincarnation, in the earlier Vedas. In the Vedas, in the Brahmanas also, after that, there's no mention of Punarjanam. And then come the Upanishads about 600-800 years after the Vedas, after the Vedic literature, and that's where for the first time we have the justification for. Because until then people were still not convinced. They were saying, what is this? We don't accept this. So they said, no, you are born like this because in your last lifetime you did bad things. So they needed Punarjanam for that, reincarnation, which had no mention in the earlier literature. And you needed karma, that your karam or your karma is recorded within you. And that you carry from one life to the next life to the next life. And it stays with you. So basically they needed karma and they needed reincarnation. Without that, there is no justification for Otherwise, this human right things comes from within, like you are human, I'm human. Why would I live a life of degradation and be underneath you? So it was explained that it was what you did last time, and because of that, it has been carried over into your this lifetime, and therefore, so without these two concepts, it was hard to justify. So these two concepts were very systematically introduced in the Upanishads. So then think about it. If it wasn't there before in the Vedic literature, and today in the Upanishads you tell me that there's such a thing as karma and reincarnation, they start telling me that, well, that way back there was another life that you had. But when people say, well, go to hell, we know you're just creating this as you go along. There was no mention of this till yesterday, and today you just keep coming up with these new justifications, things, right? Why would people accept this? Things had to be carefully devised, right? So what language were these texts written in? Sanskrit, right? So who had the permission and the right to learn Sanskrit? Only the Brahmins, right? And the Kshatris sometimes. There have been Kshatri teachers of Sanskrit also. But other than the Aryans, no one could learn Sanskrit. And it was not just about learning, that you could not use Sanskrit. You could not use it, but you could also not even hear it. So for a Shudra, wherever it was being recited, so continuously the Brahmins were reciting things in Sanskrit for hours. They were memorizing the Vedas and the Upanishads. But even if the Shudras got the sound of the sacred word in their ears, they were supposed to have molten lead poured into their ears. And let me tell you where I'm saying this from, where I'm getting this from. I'm not like just saying this like these days you can just get away with anything. That things were really bad. No, these things are actually written down. I'll tell you where, in terms of what transgression someone does and then what punishment they should have. So that you cannot come out of your caste. In the caste and the dharam, this is called dharam shastra. Manu Samriti, this is the laws of Manu, more commonly called the dharam shastra, about 2000 years old, and it's written in detail there, the rules. It has about 2500 verses, and in it it gives details of which caste would behave in what ways, what are the rights of a particular caste, Brahman's rights, the Kshatri's rights, how would the Kshatri treat a Brahman, and the rights and the behaviors of the lower castes and those who are below the four castes, the outcasts, how are they to live their lives in tremendous detail. All the punishments given, what gets your hand cut off or your foot cut off, if who touches whom, or if someone actually hits someone of the higher caste, what happens then. The details of these punishments are written down in the book, in the Dharam Shastra. Very scary details. These are sacred texts, and with apology to those, but it's very important to look at these things, all defined in minute details. Okay, so they said that we are writing it in Sanskrit. We will tell you what is written in the text. This is God saying. But it still doesn't make sense. Because for people here, what your God said, Brahma, Indra, Agni, who cares? I follow my God, whatever Indra says, what is it to me, right? Because my God is not saying it, right? I have my own temple of Krishna, Kali, whatever, and whatever you guys say, so that had to be dealt with. So the Brahman said, no, wait, we will tell you. We'll explain this to you in more detail then. So at a particular time in the text, we start seeing these arguments that these gods that you have, these are deep down, they're actually Vedic gods. So when the conditions go really bad outside, our gods, the Vedic gods, take on the garb of these local gods, who are then the avatars of the Vedic gods. So Krishna then was whose avatar? Who was the god, the Vedic god behind? So here I am in my village for hundreds of years. and I'm following Krishna. Right, it was Vishnu, right? So Vishnu in the Vedic gods was a mid-level god. They didn't have avatars of the Brahma. It was only the mid-level gods. And so they said, your god is actually Vishnu taking the form of your god. Because the society had gone so bad. You know, like that concept that when things go really bad, God sends prophets. And then we say he kept sending prophets, and then so in this case it was whenever things got so bad, the god would take on the form as an avatar. So Krishna becomes really a Vedic god, a form of the Vedic god Vishnu, and it was explained in the Sanskrit book. And the whole tradition of Krishna. Now in the nomadic tradition you keep moving on, right? So all the religious rites and rituals, so it's not that they didn't have rituals. In great detail in the Vedas, Yajurveda, Samaveda, you have the spells, the rituals in great detail. It's all written down, but, and it's a beautiful concept, there was a special space, ritual space created for that ritual. The Native Americans have similar rituals. You open up a sacred space for that ritual, and you create it in a ritualized way. And within that you carry that sacred activity for 3 days, for 21 days, whatever, and then you close down that space ritualistically. It's a very interesting concept, that there's the everyday life and then you spiritually create a space and then you close it down. That tradition suited the nomadic tribes because they were not rooted to a particular area. They could create this space anywhere. It is the people who were rooted here who created temples and who would have a heart connection to these temples. The whole Bhakti tradition where you connect to these gods with on a heart level with your god or your goddess. There was no mention of the goddess in the whole earlier Vedic literature. All the main gods were masculine gods. It was a very patriarchal system, the nomadic one. And then this one, the more agricultural one, the local traditions of having a relationship with the land, was relatively a matriarchal one. But it remained connected to the land, the goddess cultures. So the goddess traditions are all from this land. The temples are all local traditions. Even today in India, I think it was in 1400s that we had the first temple to God Brahma, and there's still not too many temples associated with him. Temples were the local tradition. Local traditions of the Devi, Tantra, Shakti is primarily not Sanskrit. It was more in the local languages. In Bengal, in the south, the Vedic literature, you really see it very differently. The nature of it has a different nature, but these are details. So they basically said that these temple gods of yours, they are actually avatars of the Vedic gods, including Shiva, who was actually in the Vedic literature was slightly lower than even a mid-level god. So the main higher gods don't have any avatars. It was these middle gods like Vishnu, like Shiva, who was even lower. Shiva's name shows up in the Vedic literature quite awkwardly, like he who should not be named. So it seems like it was more connected to the local traditions and got assimilated. Now the local traditions that I was saying that were assimilated by the Aryans, that included Pashupati. You find his seals in Harappa Mohenjo-daro. Harappa Mohenjo-daro is what era? It's 4,500 years ago, right? About 1,000 years before the Brahmins came in. There you find Yoni and the Lingam. You know when you go into the temples, that black stone, Shiva's Lingam? And so the Lingam sits inside the Yoni, and this is all sacred. Because sexuality was sacred here. There are temples here where we would celebrate sexuality. We did not have a separation between the body and the spirit. The spirit was immanent in the body. So sexuality was not bad for us. So you'd find the Lingam Yoni here. There were seals of the Pashupati here. You have the yogic postures, the horned god with the erection. All of these things, they start getting assimilated into the Aryan tradition. It was present before the Aryans, and to a great extent it remained non-Aryan, mostly in the non-Sanskrit languages. The whole tantric tradition was outside the Vedic literature. Shiva, Shakti, Pashupati, yoga, the goddess, All of this was outside the original Vedic literature. All of these things they assimilated from the local traditions into their Vedic tradition. Okay, so they said Krishna is ours. Shiva started getting associated with the local gods, and then there were no Vedic goddesses, so who could the local goddesses be avatars of? So our god didn't become female, but he started having relationships with the Vedic gods. So Vishnu got connected to Lakshmi, that she was a consort of Vishnu. So then those who followed Lakshmi were absorbed in. And how it happened, they said, we will tell you the story. Because it's written in Sanskrit, so I will have to tell you how they are connected. And people would say, well, I guess it would be alright then, because apparently our goddess herself said that she was connected. So Krishna reveals it very openly in the book, that you see me as a god, but I am actually one with Vishnu. And there was no room left for doubt, because it was in detail described in the book, in a whole chapter devoted to how Krishna reveals his true nature in Gita and the Mahabharata, right? Of how I'm really Vishnu, so he reveals his real self to Archana. And there's this whole dialogue between them. So Krishna gets connected to Vishnu, Saraswati gets connected to whom? The goddess with Shiva, right? Ganga, Parvati connected to Shiva. They were all connected to different Vedic gods. So with a lot of cleverness, and we shouldn't call it cleverness, but with a lot of intelligently, the local temple traditions and the gods were absorbed in. Ganesh got connected to which Vedic god? He became the son of Shiva, right? So the goddess Parvati, the son Ganesh. Ganesh was a very powerful, widespread following he had. So they kept assimilating these huge groups within their umbrella. And not only gods and goddesses, but the local traditions, like the tradition of bhakti, of devotion. There's no mention of that in the Vedic literature, hardly any mention of that in the Upanishadic literature, which is 600-800 years after that. So then we read Gita in the Mahabharata tradition, which was written in Sanskrit again. But let's talk about what was happening in India around the time of Gita, where it was necessary to do something new, because things were still slipping out of their hands. The gods were assimilated, the texts were written to justify absorbing their traditions in Sanskrit and then not allowing people to learn Sanskrit. Why couldn't they learn Sanskrit? Because if they had permission, they would have found out. People would have found out, not allowing them to learn Sanskrit because they were not pure enough. So it was working out, but then there was this reaction in the middle. A Kshatriya prince who said, what is this craziness? How can you drag humanity to this injustice? He said, we don't accept this caste. He went, sat under a tree, got enlightened. He said the main issue is suffering, and that liberation from suffering is the main thing. So we see the beginnings of Buddhism, right? And Buddhism really broke down the caste system. So whoever was able to break the cycle of this suffering in this lifetime, he can achieve moksha, he can achieve liberation, he can become one with the ultimate reality. In this lifetime, not in the next lifetime. Later on in Buddhism, there are Sanskrit ideas that came in when it was written down in Burma, but they broke down the caste system. Which other tradition broke down the caste system? Jain Mat, in a big way. They all said none of this in this lifetime, whether you're a man or a woman from this caste or that caste, any human can achieve liberation in this lifetime. And you're not limited by your caste. So reviewing literature from that era, it becomes clear that the social system of the dharma, of having the castes and the structure, was starting to break down. So somehow it had to be countered. For the Brahmins, the main thing has always been that no compromise on the dharma. No compromise on the caste. Other than that, anything is possible. We can mix and match gods, we can take over your traditions, we'll absorb bhakti, whatever. You know bhakti, right? The heart level connections to gods. Not just praying to gods, but like a heart level love connection to the gods. So it said we can do all kinds of adjustments, but no discussion on the dharma, because the dharma gave you your power. It gave the social order. So for the society to run peacefully, the dharma should never be crossed. The lines that are drawn by God, they should never be crossed. So your work is your work, my work will remain my work. So if God has burdened me with interpreting these texts for you, I have to keep doing it because I'm born Brahmin. And your work, working in the field, that is your work and you should continue doing it. So they never wanted to compromise on the dharma, the castes. Compromising on gods, compromising on assimilating other traditions, bhakti, tantra, Shiva, Shakti, Lingam, but no compromise on the dharma. So then when Buddhism and Jainism came and challenged the dharma, and these were very equality-based traditions, both Jainism of Mahavira and Buddhism. So the Brahmins could either give up or they had to counter this. And the Brahmin tendency is very strong. They don't easily give up. They would either assimilate a tradition or eliminate it. There is no other way. So this was the era of the Gita. A bit in Upanishads, but most openly in the Gita. They said, well, Krishna is saying, who was a local god, but then connecting it to Vishnu. So people had their god saying it to them that whatever duty you have been given, the God-given sacred duty, you cannot move away from, or the society crumbles. You keep doing your work, do it out of devotion to me, but don't give up on your duty. And if women want moksha, if you really show devotion to me and work for me, Krishna, who's actually Vishnu, then go ahead. Even though you're a woman, you can still have moksha, which the Buddhism had already offered them. So the Vedic tradition said, okay, fine, you can have moksha in this lifetime, even though you're a woman, and even the lower castes. So the Gita talks about those born in the womb of evil, the lower castes. Those born in the womb of evil. It's not just poetry. This is all in Gita. It's a small book. If you haven't read it, everyone should read it at least once. It's an amazing book, but it does sustain this whole caste system. So lower caste, women, whatever Buddhism was offering, they said we'll offer the same thing, and you can have the connection to your God as well. You can have your God and all the things that Buddhism or Jainism were offering you. So before Gita, there was no mention ever in the Vedic history that someone from the lower caste could get moksha in this lifetime. So Buddhism challenged and they countered. So you could have everything that the new traditions were offering, and you can keep your God and you can keep your tradition, the Bhakti tradition. Just don't give up on the castes. So compromises made on everything except the caste, and this is very clear in the literature that what starts showing up in which era. Now that it's all translated, it's just a matter of going and reading it. So one can see which era, what things start showing up for the first time. So that's why when we wonder why are they not able to come out of this, the programming for caste is on such a deep level. There was never a compromise on caste. Everything else one could compromise on. So Buddhism was very successfully countered the threat. And Jainism in India also. You find small groups in Gujarat and all. Buddhism was almost completely wiped out of India. You find it in the north in Tibet. It went east to Burma. Its texts were written down in Burma in Pali, but highly influenced by the Sanskrit tradition. So Burma, Tibet, Sri Lanka. It went to the northwest in Texala and all was all Buddhist, but it disappeared from the center and it moved to the peripheries. From Burma it goes to Thailand, then it moves on to China, Chan Buddhism, which became Zen Buddhism. Where else? Japan, the whole of Japan. So such a powerful teaching and practice that it emanates in all directions. But which are the Indian cities that remained predominantly Buddhist? None. It's something to think about. So the Brahman tendency is that either you get assimilated, like the Krishna tradition in Ramayana, Ram. So Ram was not a Vedic god, but he became connected to Vishnu. The assimilative tendency of Brahmanism was very strong. So this was the tradition that brought all of our local religions under this one umbrella. So the Brahmins really loved this big umbrella that the Persians had offered with the term Hindu. And then that became the Hindu mat in all the textual work that happened after that. The Europeans who came and studied the religions in the areas, first the Germans, later translations into English. These were all literate nations. They come and they look for texts. They look for the main texts of that religion. But most of the religions, the local religions of this area never had books. We know because these religions existed in the local languages, and archaeology tells us, and the nature of those religions was so significantly different than the Brahmanic tradition, the role of sexuality, etc. So we know that these were different traditions than the Vedic, but we never had really texts in these traditions as many. The texts were all written by the Brahmins because all the other work was being done by other people, so they were all focusing on memorizing and writing texts in Sanskrit, hundreds and thousands of people making this their occupation to write texts. So when the Europeans came and started translating, the books that they found were Sanskrit books, and that made the backbone of the Hindu religion the Vedic literature. Well, the backbone of religions in this area were our lived traditions, the everyday traditions, how things were worshipped in the local temple. Not what was written in the Vedas, but it was the Vedic texts that were presented, and the outsiders, because they had a bias towards written word, because that is their way. But that gave more strength, more credibility to the Brahman cause. Before that, the Persians had given one name to the religions, and that gave strength to the Brahmins. But now that the texts have been translated, now that we know that castes were justified on the basis of karma and transmigration of the souls, reincarnation, and none of them had any connection to the Vedic literature early on, they were added later on. And we know exactly when a particular concept gets introduced for the first time. Which text introduces karma for the first time, reincarnation for the first time? Which Upanishad? What gets added when Gita was written? Because the Buddhist thread was already there. So now we know when these things were added and how it all was justified over time. After that, after all the translations, now that the Sanskrit limitation is over, now that you can Google texts, the translations, it's all open. So if today someone talks about the castes, then one says, please, let's move on. We understand how it happened, it's all open now, but they're still not letting it go. We would die but not let go of this dharam thing. What dharam? What castes? Like the work of Ambedkar, which we were talking about the other day. Gandhi is fine, but Ambedkar said, be done with this caste thing. We from this land, those with the darkest skin color, obviously the ones who have spent the most time in this land, It's a simple geography thing. The skin color tells you who's been living here the longest, and who came from the outside sitting in shades reading texts, and who's been working in the fields for 9,000 years. So we need to move on. Now that we know Varna meant color, not caste, it remains a racist system and we need to let it go and move on. Gandhi has an amazing contribution when it comes to activism. The whole world learned from him. Martin Luther King, Mandela. Amazing intelligence, amazing resolve. The strength and the stand that he took of non-violence, we really value that. But when it comes to caste, he also did not touch dharma. Did he or did he not? Well, we say he was a great soul, really, really great, because he would even sit with the lower caste and have food, because he would really clean the toilets with them. I will even clean the toilet just like you, and then I'll sit on the ground and eat food with you. So what? We are all humans after all, right? So even though you're lower caste, but I'll sit with you and I'll eat with you and I'll work with you. Really great soul. But greatness is not when you still consider me a lower human being and you come and sit and have food with me and work with me. And I feel so good that such a great soul was sitting here, right here with us and eating with us, treating us almost like human beings. That is not great. Great is when you say that there is no caste, there is no dharma. You as a human being come and stand with me. You come and stand with me as humans. Ambedkar said that. Gandhi did a lot that we need to respect, and we, humanity, are really indebted to him for activism, for non-violent confrontation, for taking a stand, making injustice visible and all. We really value that. But he also did not break down the dharma system. He would have the copy of the Gita under his pillow. And one of the core messages of Gita, perhaps the most important, is that you never let go of your castes. Whatever you do, you never go out of the way dharma defines your position. That your son would do exactly what you're doing is how the society will stay stable. That the potter's son will become a potter and the warrior will remain a warrior. Even if you don't want to kill, but Arjun, this is your duty, your sacred duty. You have to kill, even if they're your relatives. Arjun had withdrawn from the fight, right? And that's where Krishna says, no, it is your sacred duty to fight. And that when you're doing your sacred duty, it is not you who kills, but through you, I, God, that kills. We sometimes say that lower caste should have better rights. In India, still to this day, the castes are not being challenged as much. But because I'm in the lower caste, can I get a quota? Can I get affirmative action, better rights? So one says just break down the whole concept of caste and move on. Because it was such a punitive system. And the tyranny of that my son will continue being a sweeper, is just going on and on. In our minds, it's like putting a metal cap on someone's head, where I cannot grow, I can't think beyond that I cannot dream beyond that. I want my son to be a doctor, to be a landlord, to be in the army, but no, this is not your sacred duty. Your work is only this. It still goes on, and it's high time that we move on from this. And those who are not convinced need to go back and read the text. I have written about these things in great detail, about which text introduces which concept for the first time, in what time, and you're welcome to borrow those documents from me. So you have the exact sources and you can go back and do more research if you want, like which Upanishad says what for the first time in which place. Castes, their impact, their justification, and who did these castes serve? Why and when they were created? We need to break it all and we need to move on. for ourselves, in our minds, and others around us who are still caught up in this whole concept of, oh, those are Brahmins and we are from such and such caste. We need to move on. If you're darker skinned, it probably means that you have a much stronger claim to this land. We need to drop it and move on. Okay, let's go for questions now, and we'll end this section, which is about the castes and the first big oppression of the people of this land, the spiritual and religious oppression, which was so deep rooted that kings and dynasties came and went, nations came and went, the Muslim rule came, the British came, they left. But this oppression has still not cleared from our roots. It's the oldest and the deepest subjugation of the subcontinent. Done by the Brahmins, we need to break it and move on, especially the Hindus amongst us, our Hindu brothers and sisters.